For nearly 3 years, Sophia Bennett had worked at Harbor Point Medical Center as an ordinary emergency room nurse. She was quiet, professional, and never seemed interested in attention. At 32, she had a calm face, dark brown hair usually tied neatly behind her head, and a habit of listening more than speaking. Her coworkers knew her as the nurse who never panicked, even when the emergency room became chaotic. What they didn't know was that Sophia had once been a combat medical operator attached to an elite military unit. She had treated wounded soldiers under conditions most people could barely imagine, but after leaving the service, she wanted a peaceful life. She had changed her identity within the hospital system, avoided military conversations, and never told anyone about the missions she had survived. To her coworkers, she was simply Sophia, the dependable nurse who brought coffee to exhausted colleagues and stayed late when someone needed help. One rainy evening, the emergency room was unusually crowded. Sophia was checking patient charts when the ambulance doors suddenly opened and paramedics rushed in with a critically injured man. 34-year-old male, severe chest trauma, unconscious. "Weak pulse," one paramedic shouted. Sophia immediately looked toward the stretcher. The moment she saw the patient's military-style wristband and the tattoo near his forearm, something inside her changed. She recognized the markings. He wasn't an ordinary civilian. He was a Navy SEAL. His name was Daniel Hayes, and he had been injured during a training operation. His condition deteriorated within seconds. The monitor began sounding rapidly, and the attending physician shouted for oxygen and emergency equipment. Sophia moved toward the bed, but another nurse stepped in front of her. "Sophia, prepare the medication." She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on Daniel. Suddenly, the monitor changed. Daniel's pulse disappeared. "He's in cardiac arrest," someone shouted. The room exploded into movement. The doctor immediately began CPR while nurses prepared the defibrillator. Sophia stood at the medication station for only a second before hearing something that reminded her of her military past, the rhythm of a collapsing patient's breathing and the desperate silence that followed. She knew the team was losing precious seconds. "Stop," she said quietly. Nobody heard her. She spoke louder. "Stop for a second." The attending physician looked at her. "What?" Sophia stepped toward the bed. "His airway is compromised. You're ventilating against resistance." The doctor frowned. "How do you know?" Sophia didn't answer. She simply moved into position and began giving precise instructions. "Raise the head slightly. Suction now. Prepare for an advanced airway. Don't shock yet." The room became silent for a moment because Sophia's voice sounded completely different. It wasn't the hesitant voice of an ordinary hospital nurse. It was the calm, commanding voice of someone who had handled life-and-death situations countless times. The doctor followed her instructions. Within moments, Daniel's airway opened, but his heart still wasn't beating. Sophia checked his pulse herself. Nothing. She looked at the monitor and immediately recognized the rhythm. "Continue compressions. Prepare the defibrillator. On my count." The physician stared at her for half a second before following her lead. 3, 2, 1. The shock was delivered. Daniel's body jolted. Everyone waited. Then the monitor produced a faint rhythm. "We have a pulse," a nurse shouted. The room erupted with relief, but Sophia didn't celebrate. She continued monitoring Daniel, checking every detail with the focus of someone who had done this in much harsher environments. A few minutes later, Daniel was stabilized and transferred toward surgery. One of the paramedics looked at Sophia with disbelief. "Where did you learn all that?" Sophia simply replied, "Experience." But before she could walk away, Daniel's military identification fell from his belongings onto the floor. Sophia picked it up and noticed the insignia. Her expression changed. She knew exactly what unit he belonged to. One of the senior doctors noticed her reaction. "You know that insignia?" he asked. Sophia hesitated. "I used to work with people who wore it." The doctor stared at her. "You were military?" Sophia looked down at the identification card and quietly said, "A long time ago." Nobody realized how much she had just revealed. The next morning, Daniel remained unconscious in intensive care, but his condition was stable. Word had already spread throughout the hospital that Sophia had helped saved the Navy SEAL's life. The staff were impressed, but the hospital director, Dr. Miller, wanted answers. He called Sophia into his office and closed the door. "Sophia, I've worked here for 20 years, he said. I've seen hundreds of nurses under pressure. What you did last night wasn't ordinary. Nursing." Sophia remained silent. Dr. Miller continued. "You recognized his condition before the physician did. You gave commands like someone trained for combat medicine. Who were you?" Sophia finally looked at him. "I was a combat medical operator." The director was stunned. "You were military?" She nodded. "I served with an elite unit." She didn't provide details because much of her previous work remained classified. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked. Sophia gave a small smile. "Because I left that life behind." Meanwhile, Daniel finally woke up. His first words were weak. "Who saved me?" The nurse beside him told him that a woman named Sophia had taken control during his cardiac arrest. Daniel's eyes widened. "Sophia Bennett?" The nurse nodded. Daniel looked confused. He remembered hearing that name years earlier. His memory was incomplete, but he recognized the calm voice that had guided him through emergencies during his military career. When Sophia entered the room, Daniel stared at her. "It was you," he whispered. Sophia smiled gently. "You don't remember me?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "I remember your voice." Sophia pulled a chair beside his bed. "Then you remember enough." Daniel had once been part of a special operations team that Sophia's medical unit supported. They had never been close friends, but they had worked in dangerous environments where everyone depended on everyone else. Daniel remembered a young combat medic who could remain calm while explosions shook the ground around her. He had never known where she went after leaving the military. Now she was standing beside his hospital bed wearing a nurse's uniform. "You disappeared," Daniel said. Sophia looked down. "I needed a normal life." Daniel smiled weakly. "You saved mine again." Sophia shook her head. "You were surrounded by good people. I just knew what to look for." Daniel laughed softly. "That's exactly what you used to say." Their conversation was interrupted by the doctor, who came in to explain that Daniel would recover, although rehabilitation would take time. Daniel looked at Sophia and said, "I owe you my life." Sophia replied, "Then use it well." Over the next few weeks, Daniel recovered slowly. Sophia continued working her normal shifts, refusing special treatment or praise, but Daniel often saw her, helping other patients with the same calm confidence she had shown during his emergency. He realized that her greatest strength wasn't her combat training. It was the fact that she never allowed her past to make her bitter. One afternoon, Daniel asked her why she had become a civilian nurse after everything she had experienced. Sophia smiled. "Because I wanted to save people without carrying a weapon." Daniel looked at her with admiration. "You did more than that. You saved people who didn't even know your name." When Daniel was finally discharged, several hospital staff gathered to say goodbye. He stopped beside Sophia and handed her a small military challenge coin. "Keep this," he said. "You earned it." Sophia looked at the coin and smiled. "I thought you weren't supposed to give these away." Daniel laughed. "I'm making an exception." Months later, Sophia returned to her normal routine. She still wore the same navy blue scrubs, still drank coffee during short breaks, and still avoided talking about her military past. But now a few people knew the truth. They didn't see her as a mysterious hero. They simply respected her more deeply, and Daniel never forgot the night his heart stopped. Because when everyone else saw a quiet nurse, Daniel saw the person who had once stood beside soldiers in the darkest places on Earth and who, years later, still had the courage and skill to bring a Navy SEAL back from the edge of death